partnerships with Pollinator District partners with the Butterfly Pavilion. I'm so grateful to them for taking this. It's an evolutionary step for just bridging traditional indigenous ways of knowing nature and knowledge and non-traditional Western science ways of knowing nature and knowledge. So, okay. So the creation, evolution, inspiration of the Manitou Springs Pollinator District. My name is Melody Daugherty. I'm the Executive Director of the Manitou Pollinators. We are an Indigenous-led nonprofit 501c3. And our mission is, we really aligned it with the City of Manitou Springs to become a more pollinator-friendly city. We're a small municipality. We're about 5,000 strong, and we really believe that it's so important to work together. And as a native elder, relationships that's our foundation. That's just who and what we are and what we do. It took us 5 years to become a certified pollinator district. We started in 2018, and we received our municipal certification last year in 2023. So we're going to embark. We'll share a little bit of this history and journey with all of you. I'm really excited. Can you go to the next slide?
Sure.
Amy, please. Okay.
Can you see that?
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So the journey really for the Manitou Pollinators actually started with our beekeeper community. I think all communities have their beekeepers. And it was a result of the 2018 Front Range bee colony collapse. I'm sure everybody knew about it. And the numbers were they were just staggering. 75 and 95%, depending on who you spoke to, were just gone. So our local beekeeper community held a public forum to teach and educate the community as to why this occurred. And so we were asked to attend. We were a small little citizen-led club. We were the Pollinator Project. And this is really important for this group of people and for any person around the world. We were grassroots, we were citizen-led, and it was just passion. And it was just that seed of thought, like, pollinators in trouble, and what can we do? So it can be a grandma, it can be a kid, it can be a neighborhood, or it can be like Amy Yager, the Horticultural Director of the only federally accredited invertebrate zoo in the world. We'll make a point about that. And then myself, I was non-executive director at the time, but it was the evolution. After meeting with the beekeepers, they informed us that the Front Range bee colony collapse was a result of climate crisis, right? Temperature changes, erratic changes in weather and temperature, loss of biodiverse native pollinator habitat, the fragmentation of just the ecosystem. I know that Cindy spoke about that, and that seems to really be at the heart of what is going on. Turn on volume. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So yeah, so the loss of native biodiverse habitat, more pavement, more housing, chemicals and pesticides are a major player. And then of course, I believe personally that when you have these changes to your environment, I believe that it compromises any being's immune system. So then there's more viruses within the bees community. So all of that message was the message to the pollinators, and we decided to do something about it. And synchronistically, the Butterfly Pavilion put out a whole page ad in the Denver Post that I just happened to open one day and read. And I approached Beth Corpenning, who is the founder of the Pollinator Project, and I said, hey, I think we should go up there and just ask to meet one of their directors and ask them about this Pollinator District thing. And that's really what it was. That's how lay people talk. So she's like, yeah, just go, you go. So I jumped in my car, drove up one day, literally walked through their customer service. And I said, I would like to talk to one of your directors about that Pollinator District. And they led me to Amy. It was just really the forces of the entire world, I think, were just blessings on me and the Manitou Pollinators. So that's what started my relationship with Amy. 2018, we really stepped it up in 2019. Beth Corpenning left to she went on a sabbatical. She's an artist and with the help of Amy Yager and another executive director for the Palm Creek watershed, we decided the Manitou Pollinators needed to step up and become a nonprofit, which cast me into the role of executive director. And then also really, I began talking more as a traditional Indigenous elder about what it's like for me coming into the world of Western conservation with my values and goals, and why I chose the book. So there we are. That's our logo. The butterflies is the butterfly. Our butterfly logo is I'm sorry, Beth Corpenning's artwork. She's a fabulous watercolorist. That's in one of our Pollinator District demonstration gardens. And there's the image of Pikes Peak. Everybody knows it as Pikes Peak. That is the Western name for the Native people. That is it's known as Tava. Tava is the center of the Great and Mighty Ute Nation's creation story. So it's a very powerful site.
Are you ready for me to move on to the next slide, Melody?
Yes, ma'am. So ways of seeing pollinators, that's what this conversation is about, and it's such an opportunity now with the League of Women Voters to step forward as a traditional Native elder. That's why I'm going to Canada. So seeing pollinators through an Indigenous perspective, some of these images I chose in the Butterfly Pavilion is actually taking the first step with me on this journey, or with Indian people on this journey, through a model that the Canadian elders have created with Canada across their provinces and their territories, their mayor, municipalities, park and recs. It's a model known as the two-eyed seeing model, creating and establishing ethical space between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people to really come together and find a more holistic and integrative solution to climate crisis. That's it, just bottom line, because we all know we're in trouble now with the pollinators, and like, what can we do to step up? One of the images you see is the sacred white buffalo and the sacred calf woman bringing the sacred chinampa to the Indian people. This is one of our ways of praying. The white buffalo calf woman, what I love about her is that she really represents the divine feminine in all of us. She also represents the earth. And we refer to her as the earth woman. We refer to her as Turtle Island here. There is, on the right is Miracle. That was the first white buffalo calf ever born in the United States. I had trekked to see her along with my elders back in, I think this was 1994, 1996. She's always near and dear to my heart because she really was the symbolism of the white buffalo calf and of Miracle was that prayers were being heard and people were going to come together. Indian people and non-Indian people were going to come together. So that was the powerful symbol message of her birth. And then down below, Amy and I, we've included Garden of the Gods, and again, Sacred Tava. The way I've come to the Pollinator District, the Manitou Pollinators, Indian people, our relationship to the earth is first and foremost. It's the most primary aspect of our life. We know we're not at the top of the food chain. We know that we're actually quite dependent on the ecosystem around us, and that there are elders. They came before we did. And so my relationship with Tava and the Garden of the Gods, Tava is literally in my backyard. Garden of the Gods is like a couple of blocks over to the north. And through prayer and ceremony, what we know is that I know that the Pollinator District became a reality through the support of those ceremonies and prayers in our sacred places and with the web of life of all of life. There is a beautiful corn. I'm Cherokee. I am from Wisconsin. I'm from the Great Lakes region. And I also have significant responsibilities and duties to the Anishinaabe and Algonquin people, especially of Canada. That's why they have made they've made it possible for me to attend a two-eyed seeing conference to bring back. I have established with the Butterfly Pavilion and others the first international United States two-eyed seeing circle. It's a great thing. So we're bringing the model of Canada to the United States. We're working on it together. And the reason why we have the corn there is that for the Cherokee people, you hear the elders and the grandmothers and the grandfathers, the medicine people, they'll say, do your thoughts, your words, your actions, will it grow corn? Will those seeds of thoughts and action behavior the ideas that you want to create going forward. Will it grow corn? Is it going to be, will it be helpful and abundant for not only the people, but for the web of life? And it's just such a beautiful phrase. It's like, as we move forward together, will these actions, will these thoughts with one another, in more relation with one another, with the earth, with anything, will it grow corn to create abundance? And at this point in time, the latest science that I've received, and I don't know if Amy would agree with this, but 85% of the invertebrates, pollinators, are extinct by 85%. That we're past the tipping point. And that's why the elders are having me come to Canada, because we're in a danger zone. They're seeing many, many signs, and that we really need to collaborate and work together. And so that we can want to do is that we want to increase pollinator habitat to rise above the footprint of people. We want to create a thriving long-term pollinator habitat, and we can only do that with good thought, with good action, and working together in right relationship. Next one. Is it your turn?
Yeah, it's my turn, Melody. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to say that my time working with Melody, it has been inspiring, and I've learned so much, and I've really felt welcomed into her community and the wider community of Manitou Springs as we've launched into working on this Manitou Springs Pollinator District together. I am from an AZA accredited invertebrate zoo, and hopefully some of you or most of you have come and visited us here at Butterfly Pavilion. And our mission is really about sharing how important these animals without backbones are to our very existence. And so knowing that most of our ecosystems on Earth really rely on these small, often insulted animals, and that they are in trouble, and that we're seeing declines globally, and that the time to do something about it is now. And of course, a special group, as you all well know, is the group of pollinating insects specifically. So knowing that over 75%, probably closer to 85% of flowering plants rely on animal pollination to reproduce and to have healthy populations, that means that our ecosystems literally ride on the backs of these small animals. And so we think a lot about agriculture, but this also means that our soil health, our water health, the cleanliness of our air, all of that is dependent on pollinators. And I come to this through a scientific background. That's my educational background. But I think what I've really been inspired by is that what I have learned in my training and my experience is really aligning so much with what Melody has also learned and also experienced. And I feel like it's really a great time right now, because we can really use both the Western science that has illustrated how important these animals are, as well as the indigenous systems of knowledge, and really to be that strengthens everyone and helps us to collaborate better. I always like to show a picture of breakfast without pollinators because it's very depressing. Not even any coffee. But I think a lot of times what people don't think about is pollinators' contribution to ecosystem services and how important that is, especially within a climate context. So the fact that biodiversity is tied to our soils, to our water, all of that really just emphasizes how important having healthy pollinator populations is to our future here on this planet. So the recent numbers that in the last report that I have come across is that 40% of pollinators in North America are in risk of extinction in the next few decades unless we make a concerted effort to do better with habitat. And that's why I'm so glad to be speaking to this group today, because you all are doing things that will make more habitat for these important animals. And something that Butterfly Pavilion has really emphasized over the past decade or more is working with many partners, including groups like Manitou Pollinators, or cities like the City of Boulder, or other organizations, to find where pollinator habitat can be anywhere, whether it's in densely urban areas or agricultural areas or wildlands. There's habitat for pollinators all there, all in all those places. So, you know, this primarily, you all know a lot of this already. You guys have been part of this pollinator habitat group for quite a while now. So we really have a call to action for this group to be thinking about how can we work together and to make more pollinator habitat, and giving the sort of experience that Melody and I have had creating the community around this pollinator district in Manitou Springs. So a lot of the pollinator district, while we do focus on pollinator habitat and of course those vital plant pollinator interactions, a lot of it is actually around people. And Melody, if you have anything, because you've worked with so many different groups of people in Manitou Springs, it's been so inspiring. But this includes, of course, volunteers and people who have that sort of a very integral interest in pollinators, but it also includes businesses, communities of faith, schools, city government. All of these aspects are coming together to build these bridges between people and the rest of the world. And instead of seeing people as on one side of the bridge and every other living thing on the other, really making sure that we are all in this interconnected web of life together. Melody, do you want to speak to some of the relationships that you've built in Manitou Springs?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. I really have to kick in the faith communities. I think that is, this year is a growing community that has a lot to offer, and I think needs to be included in the bigger scope of that. It takes a community absolutely committed. And that's what I loved about the Pollinator District certification when I was looking at it through the lens of being a professional landscaper, because that's what I do, and with the lens of being a native elder. What I loved about the Pollinator District model is it's based on a model of inclusivity, which was really important to me. And then community, and how do we keep building and growing that? That's just our way of life. So it's really talking to everybody. And I was so pleasantly surprised to learn that my business district and my Chamber of Commerce knew as much as I did, if not more. So that was a pleasant surprise. It's your restaurants. It's, like I said, the faith community. Amy, our schools are part of it, like she was saying. And then there's the community aspect of it. What's really important, though, to really pull this off to achieve your certification is that it's everything that creates a municipality includes our Park and Rec division, include our open space. It included my city administrator, my mayor, my city council. It included open spaces. It included everybody. So really the success lied in my ability to take this model that from a professional lens, I know that it had a beginning and an end, and it had a metric system that would be invaluable, that my city people would need to sit down and go, okay, where do we start? Where do we end? Where's the money going to come from? Where's the resources? Who's going to do this, right? And there's that bridge where it's the community coming in with the city, but they really do need that kind of formal outline. And what I loved about it is that I was able to come to the table, put on my landscaping hat and say, this isn't any different than what I do when I go into my clients' gardens. I come in and do a site assessment. I'm like, okay, you've got this garden, what's going on? And then we break it down, right? I have to break it down so it's understandable that there's beginning and end each stage. So it's like site assessment, then we got to do soil checks. Then we've got to figure out who's native drought tolerant plants or not. We got to check into the irrigation and the water. It's really, to me, it's a very systemized, simple approach. And there's a beginning and there's an end, and it takes time. It's not overnight. And that's why I approach gardening anyways. It's a lifelong process, but that when you're looking at resources and time and money and management, whether it's the community or in the city, you can come up with a long-term time frame. And Amy Yager and the Butterfly Pavilion, they have been, I mean, they have gone the distance and above. I can't say enough. We have been so fortunate. And that when you become a Pollinator District partner, I'm going to say it's a VIP status. You give more, but you get 150 to 200% back from her and from me. So, and then there's stakeholders and supporters. So there's many ways to be involved and many things you can do, like that planting of that seed corn to be successful in creating your Pollinator District municipality. Again, it's relationship. And what I had to do was that I had to come back. I'm really big on taking people out to lunch and like, let's talk, but you have to come back. You have to follow up. You got to follow through. There's always changes. People come and go, but also to support them, because it's the same thing with my people hire me to come in because they don't know. And so they're expecting that I have the best of the cutting edge knowledge, which I do, provided by Amy too, but to really guide them to get that real high success that they're looking for. So, yeah, I think that's it that I have to share now.
Thanks, Melody. So I thought I would just share a little bit about the Pollinator District program, because this is something that we work with communities on reaching. And so, as Melody mentioned, a pollinator district is basically a community that's committed to conserving habitat for pollinators in all aspects of operations. And that's where those partners really come in. So we're talking about parks operations, but we're also talking about educational operations, just everything, really finding a way to weave biodiversity and specifically pollinators into just daily life and making them part of the community's identity. A big piece of it, and I'll speak to a little bit of the certification process, but a big piece of it is being able to demonstrate that pollinator habitat is growing in a community and that it's not static or decreasing in a community. So working with Melody and working with other partners in Manitou Springs, we're able to add more pollinator habitat every year. And then a big piece of that too is also mobilizing people in the community to go out and see what pollinators are there and how pollinators are colonizing and finding homes throughout the space. Another community we work with in this respect is a development called Baseline in Broomfield. And we have actually had some very encouraging results from our work. The construction began 3 years ago, and we're already seeing tremendous increases in pollinators, especially native pollinators. Particularly some orders of insects that we didn't find at all in our baseline study. So there were not butterflies at baseline before we started planting habitat for them. And now we see some butterfly species. So it's very encouraging to know that putting habitat has a measurable effect on pollinator populations. And then the other major pillar of pollinator districts is really, I call it Melody's superpower. She is a connector of people. And so community members, just bringing them in, welcoming them to bring their own specific gifts and their unique skills to create this community that is really prioritizing biodiversity. And that's something that in our certification process, we're really looking for, is a community that is really devoted to educating each other about pollinators, that is sharing what they're learning about pollinators, that is welcoming different groups to participate. All of that is a big part of the certification process. So in our road, together with Melody and myself, there have been some incredible programs and projects. And Melody, do you want to talk about some of the amazing things that Manitou Springs has accomplished?
Sure. That's a beautiful slide, if I must say so myself. Okay. So to the lower right corner, that's my favorite. That's the gnome guy. He's my favorite. And that was the first garden designed by Amy Yager. That's one of the things you receive with becoming a pollinator district is Amy's design services. And this has been really helpful with our Park and Rec department. They are this year, again, they're putting in lots of pollinator designed gardens by the Butterfly Pavilion as we increase that pollinator habitat over time. So that's in the garden. Above is one of our swamp milkweed patches. I'm so proud of that. We are part of that, the Monarch Watch folks, how to create and keep some of that milkweed for those monarchs that are still kind of hanging in there and coming through Manitou. We also have, there's the, you see that metal container in the middle. This is the Valley of Pollinator District Partners. The crane, which it was led by Becca Sickbird, she decided to become a Pollinator District Partner. I get a phone call. That's usually what happens. She's like, hey, I just bought these planters. I want to plunk them down on the city landscape. Can we grow some pollinator habitat, something in there? And I'm like, absolutely. So we connected with Amy. Amy, of course, we came up with a plant list, a design list, and we have had a strong 3-year running volunteer group that tends to these pollination stations. And it's been, it just increased the value and the aesthetic of not only the URA area, like both ends of Manitou Springs, but we were actually able to collect some really great research and data, which is a part of the certification through an app that the Crane had created for that project. And to the left is our demonstration garden. We are converting that garden into being a native drought-tolerant demonstration garden for the city of Manitou Springs and our tourists. We're a heavily touristed community, and we've got maps for our gardens now that they can get at the Chamber of Commerce, and we keep building on that relationship and getting the community involved that way. Thank you.
Well, and then there's the people side of it, and one of the most exciting things about working with Manitou Springs is how creative and just vibrant and festive Manitou Springs is. And so one of my most exciting times that I've ever been in Manitou Springs is during their Pollinator Festival. One year they had a pollinator puppet parade, and talk about a community really showing up and sharing their love of pollinators in such a creative and fun way. So local artists have created designs centering pollinators, and of course people just have a great time. And so working with groups like Fountain Creek Watershed District. The person who is in the bee costume, that's Ali Shook, who is the executive director of the Fountain Creek Watershed District, just really just showing up and having fun and saying, you know what, Manitou Springs is a place for pollinators. We even worked with school children to design banners for the streetlights for the Pollinator Festival. So really bringing that artistic and cultural understanding of pollinators, because as a scientist, I love the scientific side of pollinators. I'll geek out all day, but to reach people, you also have to be diverse in your approach as well. And so these festivals and educational programs and artworks are another way to reach people with this important message. And that's a key part of the Pollinator District as well. Melody, do you have anything to add about that piece?
Thank you, Amy. Those are some really beautiful and fun slides. Amy did mention that the Pollinator Party Day, what you're seeing here is actually a part of a week-long pollinator festival that last year was our 3rd year running, and we're looking forward to carrying that tradition this year, where we actually go out of our way to honor and celebrate the National Pollinator Week in Manitou. And what we do is that relationship building and the networking. Since I'm a superpower woman like that, that's so cool. I always reach out to everybody, and I'm like, what do you want to do this year? Everybody's really engaged now. People want to be a part of this, and the ideas, the creativity continues to flow. Every year is a new year. So I just want to acknowledge that is something that we do annually, and the support keeps growing, and I'm looking forward to that as we go forward.
So In my role as Horticulture Director here at Butterfly Pavilion, I get to work with so many wonderful communities. And a lot of times there are just some very high-level things that we can go to our city staff or our county staff or different stewardship organizations and really just give some recommendations that can really improve the lives for pollinators and then of course for the rest of us. So I know when I speak to different communities, kind of the top recommendations I make is planting native plants. As you all know, many of our pollinators, especially our native pollinators, have special relationships with native plants, whether that's as host plants or we have specialist bees that only visit certain types of plants for pollen. So making sure to build those habitats that are best for these species. And that entails learning a lot about these species. So any opportunities to geek out and learn about how incredible these animals are, you know, either by attending programs like this or becoming part of a volunteer group. There are all sorts of ways to learn about the various things. And one of the things that came out of the most recent or the recent pollinating insect health study that was commissioned by the DNR was really there are pollinators that we know very little about at this point. So you know, native bees have finally started getting recognition about how important they are, but kind of harking back to Melody's message of understanding how important all these different species are in our family here on the planet Earth. You know, what do we know about pollinating flies? There are a lot of pollinating flies that we don't know much about their full life cycle. That's true for moths and for you know, then there's pollinating wasps that people don't think about at all. They just say, well, wasps, it must be something scary and I don't want it, right? So having more opportunity to learn about these animals and understand what they need to live is going to really push forward better management for these animals. Reducing potential negative impacts, whether it's from pesticides or from management practices that mow down habitat when pollinators are at their most active, really reducing those practices in favor of practices that support pollinators. Making sure that habitat is connected. So looking for opportunities, if we know that there's some really vibrant habitat in various parts of your community, what are ways that we can connect those? Are there neighbors that we can talk to about adding habitat to their own property? Or are there businesses or other property users that could help link those habitats together? And then finally, and this is my favorite one, is really starting to get some of that data together either by traditional science or through community science. That will help elucidate some of the mysteries that we have about pollinators and their habitat and their life cycles. So having especially that plant pollinator interaction data, because a lot of times we'll have information about what pollinators are in an area, but we may not have the full picture of what plants those pollinators are relying on. And if we have that information, then that helps us make better decisions about how we can make better habitat for invertebrates and for pollinators and for other living things that rely on them. So those are kind of the high-level recommendations I give when communities ask me about ways to be better for pollinators. And so I'm now going to hand it back to Melody to talk about kind of that Indigenous perspective. So Melody.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Excuse me. So how can we in our own small ways cultivate trust and reconciliation? That is, when I saw that slide, it just meant the world to me that the step that the Manitou Pollinators are taking with the Butterfly Pavilion is really in that positive direction of collective change, of truth and reconciliation. And that's the reason why I'm going on to Canada. Like I said, the Manitou Pollinators has been working with the Canadian elders through Plenty Canada, Elder Larry McDermott, and their organization. They are international, just stellar Native nonprofit. And what I love about that is that a lot of the messages that I get are quite negative about being a Native person in relationship to contemporary modern day science in the world. I've actually had people say to me, well, you know, we know about your people, but you're of the past. You really don't have anything to offer. What are you doing? And I'm always so stunned and shocked when people say that to me, right? And yet, in our traditional way, is it's important that we speak honestly and truthfully about the negative impact on Indigenous people when it comes to climate crisis and where we're at, and that we're still here. And we want to be a part of the solution. That's why I stepped up the way that I did and reached out to Amy. It's just in me. My motivation is really is in all Native people. It's our relationship to the land and to the entire environment around us. I'm dependent on it. It takes care of me, and I really need to be listening and finding ways to help it along. So the challenges that I did face as a traditional elder in Western conservation is why I reached out to Elder Larry. Canada has got a program in place. They've been doing this for decades. The elders approached, like I said, their Western governance systems, and they came up with a program, the Chiwetzing model, creating and acting ethical space between our societies and our different cultures to create a better path moving forward. And I'm so grateful for our circle. A lot of we have a right to all of this. We have a right to be working with all of you, and we do have something to say of value to just improve the quality of life, and for us to really improve the quality of life for the pollinators that we see just they're having a hard time. So we're grateful that the Butterfly Pavilion just took a risk to move forward with us in this collaborative spirit and to just make a better world for everybody. That's all I have.
Thank you, Melody. And at this point, we have been as I mentioned, we work with a lot of different people from different communities to increase pollinator habitat. And so we have with us Casey and Jonathan. So I thought if you guys want to talk now about the journey that you all have been on in Lafayette.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to speak today and give a testimonial about how things have been going for us in Lafayette. I met Melody only a couple of months ago. I first came to know about pollinator districts by hearing a story on NPR. And then around that time, I met Jonathan, and he reached out to Melody, and good to her word, she came out and had lunch with us. And it's not a super close drive from Manitou Springs to get to Lafayette, but she was willing to make the trip, and that really made a big difference in starting connections. Friends of Coal Creek is a relatively new organization. We're less than a year old. And I started out of a place of wanting to do something that was going to help caretake the land around me. I had gotten over the idea that nature was something that exists only up in the mountains and is not nearby to me. And once I kind of took it to heart that nature was closer, I wanted to look out for it in a better way. My journey to Pollinator City certification kind of came by way of two questions. What can we do and what should we do? So I spent the first time, well, first of all, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a landscaper. I'm actually a former journalist. I have no experience whatsoever in biology or horticulture or ecology, any of that stuff. So I was a little intimidated. But I was asking, what can I do and what should I do? So pollinators, as you all know, are really having their moment. Everybody is into pollinators. The more conversations you have about pollinators, the more excited and enthusiastic people you tend to meet, which is great. It's a movement that's kind of building itself. And I knew that I wanted to do something that would allow all people to be involved in the effort, whether you have a yard, a farm, a business, a couple of containers outside your front door, no matter what your age or your background is. I wanted something that would enable everybody to sort of be part of the same effort to bring and restore life back to the land around us. And so I started to think about, what can we do then? Having decided that working with pollinators is something that we should do, what can we do? So the beautiful thing about pollinator habitat, and I think Amy and Melody both mentioned this, is that no matter what kind of land you have, you can overlay pollinator habitat on top of it. Suburbs, great. Urban areas, fine. Retail districts, commercial, industrial, all these types of lands can hold pollinator habitat if you do it in a concerted and thoughtful sort of way. When I think about other things like megafauna, like pronghorns, like it's really going to be difficult to have pronghorns walking down the street. But you can have any of the 1,004, I think it is, different species of native pollinating bees around you. And that's in the state of Colorado. So after that, we started to think about different ways to come to this idea. I like to sometimes say that pollinators found me because I was lucky enough to get plugged into what the Butterfly Pavilion was doing in community education for pollinators. So I got myself a quick education, very quick. And from there, we started to, gosh, I just lost my train of thought thinking about how quick my education was. So we started to look at what different sorts of certifications were available. And there are many of them. There are some of them that seem to be less scientifically rigorous and some that seem to be more scientifically rigorous. The Butterfly Pavilion's Pollinator City program being on the more side. We wanted something that was going to be durable in the community, something that would take a while to do and had a lot of scientific backing. The reason I say it's important for it to take a while to do is that you want it to last. So if you spend 5 years putting it together, you want to be sure that it's going to be around for 20 or 30 or 50 years or however long, but not something that's going to, change priorities with your city when the city administration or the city council changes. So we wanted something that was going to be durable. And we wanted something that was going to be scientific. We wanted something that was going to have a lot of best practices wrapped into it already, and something that had the imprint of, a very well trusted and beloved community institution in the Butterfly Pavilion. So this gave us a lot of things that we were wanting. So right now we're in the very early stages of this. I'm probably not terribly far ahead from where any of you would be if you decided to go forward as well. In fact, Amy and I are presenting to a board in Lafayette on Thursday evening to do a lot of this sort of initial information and what is a pollinator city and how do we move forward in this. And so that's just happening now. In the meantime, and with Melody's help and guidance, we've been developing a steering committee to sort of get the effort going on more individuals than just me and Jonathan here in Lafayette. So we've been building up, I think, we have about 9, it might grow to be 10 or 11 people who are going to be involved in this effort. And like Amy and Melody both said, it's really about community building. We have folks from all different walks of life and background that are going to try to be able to speak to different stakeholders around the community to really represent and show and demonstrate that, a pollinator district is something that the entire city wants to support and wants to see where they are. And much of our initial emphasis, especially this spring, is in our residential program. We are trying to figure out where those pockets of native gardens are so we can put them on a map so we can figure out how much change we're able to affect over the course of going through this. So we are delighted to start with humble home gardeners who maybe are already having native plants in their landscape or want to know more about it. And there is an enormous appetite for that type of information right now. So we're going through and we'll call it certifying gardens that have the right number of plants and bloom at the right amount of time and are also shelter plants for different pollinating insects. And we're trying to figure out where that stuff is. I mentioned before that we really want to make sure that everybody can be involved. So this residential program, you can do it at any scale and in any way. So that's our big emphasis now, and we're moving forward with a retail type district program too. That sounds similar to what Melody got up to. It's really interesting how many of the paths lay out similarly for every different community. Lafayette is a place of 30,000 people. It's suburban and I guess I'd say semi-urban, but we also have some agricultural areas as well. it's a little bit different out here in the plains, but only in terms of imagination. Any community, I feel, with enough dedication from the people that live there and the staff of the cities and the administrators, that they're going to be able to do this kind of thing. And indeed, as I've been kind of, I don't want to say evangelizing, but it does feel like that about pollinators sometimes here in Lafayette. Then I'll talk to people in Erie, one of our neighbor cities, or a couple cities up the way in Superior that suffered the Marshall Fire a couple years ago. And folks there are interested in this too. Pollinators in our communities is really a movement that's almost become a force of nature unto itself at this point. And it really gives us an opportunity to tie in with efforts such as the one that Melody has spearheaded up in Manitou Springs. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've heard from folks in Golden and Colorado Springs as well. So this is an idea whose time has really come. And there are ways to get everybody involved and excited about this, but to wrap in the excitement and the enthusiasm that is like right at the surface. And if y'all have been talking to folks about pollinators for any amount of time, you know that this is there. And that's probably one of the reasons that you're on this call too. So really together, a lot of discrete little actions are becoming quite quickly bigger than the sum of the parts, which is really the idea. I like to share a little stat that I learned in that crash course of pollinator education I was talking about, but our native bees tend to have a flight range of just 150 feet. So it's quite short. And Amy, you can correct me if I'm wrong in that, but I've been saying this stat all over the place, so I hope I'm not wrong. Which means if you want to overlay pollinator habitat onto a landscape, you need to have a lot of little dots. So this is an emphasis, and this is an effort that is really neighbor to neighbor and house to house, and then neighborhood to neighborhood, and eventually city to city. And that is how these things come together. And it seems to me that's how these things come together. But it's possible to do if we all kind of do our bit. And I'd like to pass it over to Jonathan now, Jonathan was the first one to reach out to me about this. I had heard the story on NPR and I was like, wow, wouldn't that be awesome? But maybe that's not for us right now. Jonathan was not deterred. He reached out to Melody and got that meeting that I was talking about, and has really been super instrumental in making sure that we're making good decisions here in the beginning to get the effort off on the right foot. So I'll pass it over to Jonathan now. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. And can everybody hear me all right? Great. Okay. So yeah, I just really want to thank Melody and Amy and Casey for all the inspirational and really profound work that they've been doing on this topic. I mean, as in the introduction you heard, like, my focus is Middle East politics. So you might be wondering, how the heck is this guy involved with this? And I have a little presentation here that I was hoping to share. I'll see if I can share my screen here. Amy, would you be able to end your screen sharing?
That's what I'm trying to do. Hold on.
You're on, Jonathan, anyways.
Oh, my screen is sharing at the
Yes.
moment? So can you see this presentation here?
I see a little thing in front of a pink.
did. Is
Sounds
that
like Katie did, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
not
sorry.
that's not my
Yeah, let
screen.
me see if I can.
Okay.
I might have to leave and come back. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Not seeing the screen sharing controls on my computer.
Kathy, do I need to make Jonathan a co-host for him to be able to share?
no, that's not
Okay.
what's doing it.
Can you kick me out and then?
I think
I'm not seeing the screen share on mine. Well, let me see. Hold on.
Maybe
Hold
if you hit
Oh, I can do
escape,
it.
it'll
Hold on.
go
Yeah.
from
Okay.
So, did that do anything? No. I'm not seeing how to kill it on mine either. So
Yeah.
Amy, maybe you need to get out and come back in.
There we
real
go. Now I
quickly.
can.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like I'm out.
Yes, you are.
great. Okay, and everybody can see my boring black screen here.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So before I get into like my story at all, I want to talk a little bit about these two topics, or the first topic first, and then the second topic after I share about that story of how we came to it. And to do that, I want to take a little bit of a step back. This first image is a map of Colorado, and these red dots here are the boundaries of the map of Colorado. And this is Larimer County, and the red dots are a little bit harder to see, but just at the edge there. Then this is a map of Fort Collins. This is a satellite picture of the address of the League of Women Voters. And this is a residential neighborhood right the next block over. And my question is, like, what's the thing that's in common about all of these things, apart from the geographic location of Colorado or Fort Collins? And my answer to this is compartmentalization. And to me, compartmentalization is at the very basis of Western thought. Melody was talking some about the differences between indigenous ways of knowing and Western ways of knowing. And this aspect about compartmentalization is at the very core, in my view, of Western thought and life. And think about in your own life, you've got your job description. That's the box of your responsibilities. You've got your personal property. You've got your car, which is a nice little box. You drive to your work. That's your other box. And it has undeniable strengths, but it also has undeniable weaknesses. And before I speak about the weaknesses, I just want to talk a little bit about the scientific method. And at the very basis of the scientific method is this assumption of the separateness of phenomena, that phenomenon A is separate from phenomenon B, that we can study these in separation of each other and come to some understanding of it. And to put this in more pragmatic terms, we study biology separate from the environment. We study politics separate from the economy. We study and how those academic disciplines draw boundaries around topics of study. And there's very little crossover between these academic disciplines. And so compartmentalization leads to the fragmentation of knowledge. And the fragmentation of knowledge leads to the isolation of people. And so you might be wondering, what the heck does any of that have to do with pollinators? And here's where I'll switch over to my story. So I studied international studies, specifically on the Middle East. And what I noticed is that you have human rights people, you have security people, you have people who study intelligence, like the intelligence services, you have people who study the environment. And each one of these groups of people study these things in isolation from one another. And that isolation of academic disciplines, of silos, it makes these academic disciplines isolated from each other's critiques of one another, when really they should be listening to one another. And at the end of my program, I was coming to the end of my program, I was reading an NPR article about Pollinator District. And I said, what the heck, I'm tired of being isolated, put into this one box that I'm supposed to study these things from. And here's an incredible thing that's trying to break out of the boxes and patterns of thinking that we typically have, the Pollinator District. So I sent off an email to my local town government. They connected me with some other person who connected me with some other person who connected me with Casey. And Casey really was really inspired by it. And Melody was really, really responsive. I just sent this as a cold email, and I didn't even expect a response. But Melody could see the potential and came up. And so the point of all of this is that human connectivity is the very basis of pollinator connectivity. And here I just want to come back to this map of Fort Collins. You can see the boxes at work, right? The boxes of the Western scientific mind at work within the boundaries of Fort Collins. And you can see these, like, if you look at the left hand, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but if you look at the left-hand side of the map, you see Canyon Park, the Kathy Fromm Natural Prairie area. These are little open spaces that have been compartmentalized away from the rest of the city. And that compartmentalization is a result of the compartmentalization of town government. But just to take a step back to human connectivity, the real Amy spoke to the real superpower of Melody and the ability to connect with people. And it's a quality that Casey really shares also, is just an ability to go and talk to business people, town people, science people, environment people, youth, any group that you can imagine, and just talk about pollinators and get people connected. Because I think the case of pollinators and the case of local native pollinators, it's a real intuitive idea. People get it once you start speaking to them and you say it in terms that they are listening for. They get it. They get it right away. So building that connectivity between people, and I'll go back here to this image of a little neighborhood, like going across the literal boundaries of property and just talking to people. That's what creates the connectivity of an environment. And if you're able to create little gardens of native plants for pollinators around areas, you break down the compartmentalization and the segmentation of things that is so present in our society. So from that, again, coming back to Fort Collins and the question of local government, this very strange map of Fort Collins, this is the story of every single town in Colorado. Open up Google Maps and type in any town in Colorado, and you see these very strange maps of towns with these little exclusions, like boxes within a box that depends on another town. If you take a look at this at the top right of this image, you see in this Maple Hill area, I know very little about Fort Collins, but from a political science perspective, my eye is drawn to this box within a box that apparently is not the authority of Fort Collins. How can you do things when authority is fragmented in such a way? And so that brings me to these 3 higher level tips that I have for analyzing local government. So the first, and this is a bit of a text heavy slide, I apologize, is to map out how responsibilities and authorities are compartmentalized in your local town on a formal level. So this looks like the question to ask here is, how is legal power, legal authority, and social priorities structured on a formal level among councils, committees, departments, and so on? So I'll just give a quick example here of Lafayette. In Lafayette, you have the town council, which includes the mayor and a couple of town council people, at this very high level who ostensibly are the top level decision makers in our town. Then underneath the city council, you have these different departments. You have open space, you have parks, you have the downtown authority, and so on. And the way generally in Lafayette things work is these departments develop recommendations, they send them up to the council debates it, and they make decisions on it. So understanding how things work on a formal level from the standpoint of the legal authorities, the councils, the committees, the departments is really critical to get that picture of how does that work within my town. Then the second part is seeking to understand how authority, power, and people's egos are divided across these many parts on a human level. So, for example, open space and parks tend to have pretty different ideas about the environment, even though they're both focused on the environment. They're both dealing with the same set of basic parameters. They're both looking at a shared thing because their job descriptions are different, because their departments operate according to different priorities, and because the individuals that are placed within these things have different educational backgrounds, different perspectives, and so on. They develop these different like mini cultures, and these mini cultures, we're all familiar with them, and they really play out on this basis. But the key part is that those different perspectives become tied to ego, and the ego of people in authority positions. And what you have to be really careful about is that your own initiative, in this case, pollinators, don't trigger the lines of ego and power and authority within these, across these different departments. Because if you wind up with the pollinator project becoming only a sustainability initiative, only a hyper environmentally friendly initiative, then you're going to run across the fault line, the general divide between a progressive perspective and a conservative perspective, that then trigger into people's egos, into people's stories about things. And suddenly you have this initiative that can be really uniting, that everybody can get, that makes sense from a business perspective, from a governance perspective, from an environmental perspective, from all these different perspectives. And it kind of falls into the trap of the box. And so the third is based on this analysis, based on a structural analysis, and then based on a human analysis, getting a sense of what people's personalities are. You transform the parts into partners. And so this comes back to the idea of human connectivity being the basis of pollinator connectivity, creating these strong human connections and interpersonal connections and bonds that allow people to step outside, step beyond the department, step beyond the job description, step beyond the limited, narrow box that they've prescribed for themselves or they've had shoved upon them by somebody else, and get them to connect on the idea of restoring native plants and pollinators, and get them to connect with each other. And that's the real, to me, that's the basis of the success, that tremendous success that Melody has had in Manitou Springs. And it's the basis of the success that Casey has been having in Lafayette. Like, all of this analytical nonsense is utterly just, ultimately just nonsense and a tool at the end of the day. And without that human connectivity piece, there's no use to put that tool toward. So yeah, I've kind of spoken a mile a minute here about a lot of different things, and I hope that it was helpful on the local government piece. If people want, I can, and so long as it's fine with Casey and Amy, I can share some of the kind of more behind the scenes piece about how do you operationalize the very rigorous rubric that that the Butterfly Pavilion has developed. But I think that this is the most important two pieces that I can share is one, going beyond the compartmentalization that's kind of the thrust of Western thought and life, and realizing that Indigenous peoples have had this figured out for millennia, that we aren't separate, we're actually integrated and deeply related with one another in our environment. And the second is this kind of analytical framework that I proposed on top of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think this would be a good time to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, and is it okay if we take the screen share off as well? So we can, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, so are there questions? I'm gonna go to you, Ruth. You are muted. There you go.
Yeah, hi. This has been so absolutely wonderful. So we had started a couple of us had started considering certification for Fort Collins through Bee City USA, which is a Xerxes program. And so I'm just curious, Amy, Melody, Jonathan, Casey, whoever wants to talk about the difference between the Butterfly Pavilions and Bee City USA. Just, I don't know much about the details of either program, so you could just offer whatever you think is of interest or relevance. Thank you.
I'll kick it off because I actually also work with some communities that are certified by Bee City. I would say the biggest difference is that with Butterfly Pavilion, we're actually, what's important to us is that we're actually measuring the amount of gain that we're seeing in pollinator habitat over time, and that we have a more hands-on relationship with those communities. In my experience with Bee City communities, it is, again, very community-led because it relies on those, like a committee to move things forward. But it is much more high level and not so much looking at how habitat is increasing. It's mostly just looking for a commitment by that city to be bee friendly, right? So I think both programs have their virtues for sure. I think where I am really proud of the Pollinator District program is that it is really measuring the positive impact that you are having, both through looking at how pollinator populations are changing over time and how habitat is increasing over time.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to learning more about the specifics of your certification program. I wasn't even aware before right now that you had one, and it would be so neat to connect with the Denver group, the Colorado group, rather than a national one in some ways.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm gonna Kathy and then Julie.
Hi, I'm Kathy Wilson. I live in Loveland. We've had some work. Cindy and I were at a festival here, Pollinator Festival, last summer, and one of our members who is out of town right now has been putting in some native plant areas in our open spaces around here as well. But I'd like to know what you think our first steps might be to talk with city people here about getting a pollinator district for Loveland.
Casey, do you want to share your experience?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. I chose, and it sounds like Melody kind of did it similarly, was a grassroots way. So by organizing people who are already into native plants and already had native gardens and to start to build a constituency that way, we felt like we would have people that could then take the effort up to city council or up to some of the other city boards and to really show the mayor and the city councilors all that this wasn't an idea that, you know, just some guy who has a new nonprofit had, but it was something that was really coming up from people. So getting people organized around the idea and excited about the idea and knowing who they are, I think was definitely our first step. And then sort of creating ways to let them be involved with and connected to the process was important too. And since we started that kind of last year, now we've been going around to open space and sustainability and a lot of different silos that Jonathan mentioned to try to get all those people talking. Someone mentioned, but I'll meet with anybody who wants to meet. And so I've had coffee with a lot of different city councilors, a lot of different city staff, people from different city boards, educators, kinds of all different kinds of people that want to be involved somehow, and then start to tie them into one effort. So for me, it was really a grassroots start that then kind of led up the quote unquote power structures into city government.
So so you're talking about an upward movement as opposed to going to the city council and starting there and going down to parks and, you know, open spaces and all of those.
Yeah, my general strategy was to get people excited on a personal level to this instead of have it be a mandate from a boss. You need people all around city government. You need people all around town. So figuring out who those people are and helping them self-select into the process instead of just being someone who's given a directive from a boss who maybe won't have that kind of personal buy-in to the process has been the way that I've been going about it.
All right, thanks.
And if I can just add to that, I don't know how many of you have been to Lafayette or driven through Lafayette, but Lafayette has on the south side some really great like open space and native plants and so on. The north side and kind of like a ring on the outside of the city, but very little in the middle. And the reason is because all that space in the middle are private homeowners or private businesses and so on. So at some point, in order to really grow pollinator habitat, you have to be engaging with just simple people, private homeowners, and that those things will create the dots and those connections between those environments around the outskirts of the city that are really great.
Julie, can I ask one more thing before you do? So we have xeric landscaping in the front and back of our house. What about if we go around the neighborhood and find everybody else with xeric landscaping and say, hey, you know, can that be a way to get this started? And just go around the city looking for people who've done things already in that.
That is precisely what we're doing this spring. Yeah, I've made up a little flyer. I know where many of the gardens are. I'm going to be riding my bicycle around and putting flyers at the gardens that I like and the gardens that look like they have habitat potential and getting those folks wrapped in so we have our base map. Once we know what the base is, we can start to be like, well, we've got a bunch here, we've got a bunch here. How do we connect them? Because it's all about connecting it to make that sort of one end of town to the other overlay of habitat. So once you know where your good spots are, you can look for your weaknesses and you can work to your weaknesses.
Cool, thank you.
Well, and just speaking as a bug nerd, like I love my neighborhood, and I don't live in Manitou Springs or Lafayette, but in my neighborhood, I will totally like talk to my neighbors about like, did you know you had a Western bumblebee in your garden today? You know, like, and that gets people like pretty excited because they don't know what they have necessarily. So if you can do that, that's a plus.
That's great. I'm going to move on to Julie because Julie is one of our council members here in Fort Collins. And Julie, I hope you'll take the time to boast about what the city does for pollinators. Please.
Well, yeah, I will tell you what I can. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me. Yeah, I'm a council person in Fort Collins. And also today, Kate Rentschler is here with me. She's an environmental planner at the city. So she may know the deep details. I'm actually in Washington, D.C. right now at National League of Cities, where I just walked away from a Nature Everywhere strategy gallery thing. So I love this. I love all you've had to say. And Jonathan, it speaks to me so much about breaking down these silos. Like we're trying to do it at the city, trying to do it in life, trying to do it in our communities. So all that being said, my question is actually a pretty simple one, I think, which is who is responsible for tracking the data that ensures that you are increasing your habitat? So going back to what you guys were just talking about with all of the residential, you know, we do have pollinator gardens that we sell the seedlings and everything in the spring. Is this something the city tracks, or is it something a group that is pushing for this would track?
So I can speak to working with Melody in Manitou Springs. Manitou Springs it has been a grassroots effort. And so we are working with community members in Manitou Springs to track that information. The benefit of working with Butterfly Pavilion is Melody sends all that to me. I create a report. I share it with the community, that then they can share that report widely about the great results that they're seeing. So that's also how with Baseline, who is which is our first certified pollinator district development, we actually we provide services where we go and do the tracking. But for most municipalities, it makes sense to kind of mobilize their community members to collect that information.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Butterfly Pavilion run our butterfly room up at our gardens?
That's right. Yes. So
Okay.
we have a butterfly exhibit at Gardens on Spring Creek. We're very proud of
Okay.
it. It's great.
Okay, good. And I don't know, I mean, I know you didn't raise your hand, Kate, but is it okay for me to turn it over to you, or if you have any questions or things you want to talk about what the city already does?
Sure, I'd be happy to add some of what we do. So like Julie mentioned, I'm Kate Rensler. I'm an environmental planner in our natural areas department. And I also, which is our open space program the city runs. And then I also am a member of our Nature in the City team, which is an effort within our natural areas department. So Nature in the City is really kind of trying to get rid of some of this compartmentalization that Jonathan was talking about. So, you know, of course, we have our natural areas that are blocked off and they're for wildlife or appropriate recreation. But Nature in the City is really focusing on other city departments, other public lands, private lands, and trying to increase habitat there and access to nature all across the city. So we run a grant program for community members to improve habitat on their privately owned lands. We've completed over 90 projects at this point. Nature in the City's been running since 2015. So we're coming up on 10 years of work. So we have over 90 projects that we've completed. That's at a lot of HOAs, schools, faith-based organizations, businesses, nonprofit lands. We also partner with the city's Xeriscape incentive program, which is out of our water conservation. And so the city offers a 75-cent rebate for any high water turf converted to low water turf. And in 2021, Nature in the City started partnering them to, if someone uses 80% native plants in that conversion, they get an extra 25-cent incentive. So now over half of all of the Xeriscape programs are into native landscapes, which is about 50 a year. The Xeriscape typically seems to have around 100 a year right now. And so about 50 of those are into natives. We also support the Garden in a Box initiative. I'm going to assume many of you are familiar with. It's a great program run by Resource Central out of Boulder. So the city typically offers around 200, 300 rebates, $25 rebates for folks. And Nature in the City funded Resource Central's first all-native Garden in a Box design. And then we just last year funded their first one they're offering that's all native for dry shade, because that's a very difficult thing we run across here on the Front Range, finding good native plants for dry shade. So we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot to try to support pollinators and support it on private lands and also city lands. It's another exciting thing I think Nature in the City does. We fund projects on other city properties. So we've worked with our Parks Department to install native pollinator gardens on projects. We've worked with our stormwater detention basins to plant more native shrubs or do green infrastructure bioswales. We're working with our library right now to install a pollinator sensory garden that they can do educational events at their library. So really, we're really trying to do a lot and run the full gamut and make sure we're really covering our bases to help promote pollinators. So there's more out there. We do a lot of resources. I work with Cindy a lot. Cindy, I don't know if you want to talk about that more. We run for 4 years now a native plant and seed swap that's been hugely successful. But Cindy, why don't you talk about that? I'll let you run with that.
Well, I'll say that because it's foremost on the brain. Saturday, a group of 35 volunteers got together and planted 3,000 plants. We'll go back in April, transplant those, so double that, and then we give them away at the city's Xeriscape Garden Party, they call it. And we also offer references for people who are coming as to how to plant them, where to plant them. And then the next step we do is the dig and donate. So they bring things from their gardens to share with their neighbors to pass on. All native plants, pesticide-free, and we do some vegetables. I'm glad you said that, Kate, because many of the individuals I see here are part of that. It's a group of about 8 individuals representing different organizations that came together. And we now call ourselves the Northern Colorado Native Plant Exchange. We are running close to running out of time. And so
I think Melody wants to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I will.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm in Chicago. I got to do my train change, but thank you so much, everybody. And what
Melody, you just became muted.
Okay.
Sorry
So I'm
about
guessing. Okay. We're.
I'm heading into my train change. Everybody, thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation. And what I want to really emphasize with Jonathan's presentation is, please do not forget minority people, marginalized people. This is a predominantly white board, right? So please reach out to them. This is a great model for them to incorporate. And I also want to remind everybody that we have transcontinental migrators. We've got monarchs and hummingbirds. So it's like, it asks us to go beyond that silo, to think of the larger turtle island that we're on, and that we have to keep staying connected, to have these conversations, to keep building these relationships so that we don't, like Jonathan says, our ego doesn't get into our little town and we're it. That's not my motivation. That's not the motivation for Indian people, and reaching out to all of you so that we can create that beautiful like web of connection to grow this, to support everybody. Just from that place of humbleness and respect for the earth, and really to take care of our great transcontinental migrators and everything down to the native bees that Amy was describing in her yard. With that, I've got to go. Thank you. This was a blessing. It was exciting. And I look forward to talking with all of you soon in the future.
Yeah, so Melody does leave us with the next step. And being in Fort Collins, I don't want to put you on this, where did you go, Julie Ching? To reach out to you to see if a few of us can sit down and maybe have a conversation in Fort Collins, taking that step with city government. And we still have Kathy there and Mary. I know you're both in Loveland, that maybe one of you would be, wanting to do something like that in Loveland and keep both of those are members of the pollinator habitat group that we're in. So that's great too. And we lost Christy. I know she had a question, and I feel bad that she had to go.
And Cindy, can I just interject? If anyone has questions or would like to see sort of the categories we look at, some of that more in-depth information, I'm going to put my email in the chat and just reach out to me, and I'm happy to share some more of the details.
I appreciate that, because I think this kind of just feels like a start part. In some ways, I think we have the advantage of some of this already happening in Fort Collins, but how do we go forward in maybe looking at that as a certified district? And so if we can call on all of the speakers that were here today, that would be real helpful to us, I think, going forward. I am going to respect your time, and I want to share a quote that Melody shared with me. I reached out to her about a week ago and told her about the enthusiasm of this presentation and how people were jumping on. And I see a lot of people have asked me to make sure it was recorded so they can watch it later. But this was her response to me. The butterfly wings are drumming up new wind currents for all of us to fly upon. And I think that kind of summarizes how this, what Casey said earlier, the pollinator thing is happening. And let's stay connected with it and make some positive changes going forward. But thank you all. Have
Thank
a
you
great
all.
rest of your day.
Thank you.
Don't
Thank
rush
you,
out and
Cindy.
clean your gardens today. There's no
Thank
reason
you.
for that. Just enjoy the nice weather right now. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Cindy.
I appreciate you
Bye.
all.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.